In your kit this month, you will find 15 blue 3x6 rectangles and 8 pink 3x6 rectangles. We are going to be making 15 square and a square blocks. I will show you two different methods. Before you start cutting on anything though, go ahead and mist your fabric with either best press or sizing or spray starch and press it dry. I'm not going to show you that on camera again this month. You can go back and check last month if you need a refresher. I have already done that to my blocks, so I'm ready to start cutting. The first method I'm going to show you uses a specialty ruler. It is the Square squared ruler from Studio 180 Designs, and it is by Deb Tucker. This ruler is made to get precise square and a square blocks. It will make from 1 inch to 6 inch finished blocks. The first thing we're going to do is cut our center squares, and those are all going to be from the pink. And to do that, we are going to pick the center square for a 3 inch finished block. These squares are a precise measurement for getting a finished 3-inch block. I've centered that 3-inch square over my blocks, and I'm actually cutting 2 at a time. You could probably do more. My first step is going to cut a clean edge on 2 sides. And from each of these rectangles, you will be cutting 2 center blocks. You will have one extra one when you finish. So once I have my clean cut edge, then I'm going to line up my 3-inch for the finished square. It's not actually 3 inches. And it's a little bit hard to do when you have a tripod in the way of the ruler. So I have my line for that 3-inch finished square on my 2 cut edges. Cut, and it's going to take one more cut. So if you're using this ruler, go ahead and do that for 15 squares. In addition to my markings for my center square, there is a chart for cutting squares to cut triangles to go on the 4 sides of my center square. So I want to go down to my 3-inch finished, and I need to cut squares that are 2 3/4 inches. So that's what I'm going to cut from my blue fabric. Okay, this time I have 4 pieces of blue stacked up. I'm just using a regular ruler this time. And I want to clean cut my edges. Make sure that your pieces are centered on top of each other enough that you're actually going to get your whole 2 3/4. And then I have a stack of these, so rather than turning my stack, I'm going to turn the cutting mat. 2 3/4 and 2 3/4 is 5.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 3/4 by 5.5. And then I'm going to just back my ruler up to the 2 3/4 mark and cut. So there I have my, well, out of one piece, 2 3/4 inch squares. Rather than picking them up and moving like I just did, we now want to cut them in half on the diagonal. So I am lining my ruler up point to point, and if you want to get it really accurate, you can line up your 45-degree line on your ruler along one of the edges and then cut it in half. And we're going to do that to all 15 pieces of the blue. Once we have all our pieces cut, we are going to add the triangles to opposite sides of the square, and the triangles are cut slightly oversized, so we're just going to center them on the square, and if it's not perfect, it's not the end of the world. when we stitch from the square side, because our goal is to get our 1/4 inch seam as perfect as possible on the square since it is cut to size. So here's one that I've already stitched on both sides. Once it's stitched, we're going to press. We want to press the seams away from the square. So to do that, put your triangles on top, press the seams in place as sewn, and then we're going to flip it up and with the iron just press, which gives us a piece that looks like this. Once we have this piece, then we want to go ahead and add our triangles to the other two sides. Again, my triangle is oversized, so I'm going to just center it on that square, and I can see whether this about the same amount is hanging out here or not. And again, we're going to stitch with the square side up so that you get as accurate a 1/4 inch seam allowance as possible on the square. Once the pieces are sewn to the last two sides, then once again press toward the outside, so that's what it looks like on the back. Our Square² ruler has another side that we haven't really looked at. This side is for trimming down the finished block. So I'm going to put the block down, well, not on top of the, put the block down, and we want to line up the 3.5 inch finished. There are little cross marks for each corner on the block, so we want to line those up on the inside. And let's see if you can, so you can see here I have it lined on that corner, on that corner, on that corner, and on that corner. Once you have it lined up, then we're going to go ahead and cut off two sides. And then we're going to turn the block and line up those marks again. But this time we also have our 3.5 inch trim mark that we can line up on the two sides that we already cut. So when you have it all lined up, then cut off the last two sides. And once that's done, there we have our pretty much perfect square and a square block. We have a 1/4 inch on all the corners. So if you don't choose to buy the squared ruler, you can still make your square and a square block. It might not be quite as perfect, but it will still be pretty good. Because you don't have the squared ruler to cut your center squares, we are going to cut our pink rectangle into two pieces that are 2 5/8 inches. So two and 5/8. I want the whole. Okay, I have my clean edge. So I'm going to line up the 2 5/8 mark and the here and here. And when you have it, cut it off. We're going to repeat for the second one out of our rectangle. Okay, and then from the blue square, we're going to cut it exactly the way we did before. We're going to cut two 2 3/4 inch squares. And remember, 2 3/4 times 2 is 5.5. So I just go ahead and cut my 5.5. And back down to the 2 3/4. And we're going to cut these in half on the diagonal just like last time. And the sewing will be exactly the same. So the triangles, again, they're going to be oversized onto opposite sides, press toward the outside, and then put the last 2 triangles on. So this is my finished square and a square that I did without the square squared ruler. We still need to square it up, trim it down to our 3.5 inches square, but you don't have the square squared ruler, so we want 3.5 inches. We want to make sure there's 1/4 inch on our corners. So I'm lining up my 1/4 inch mark here and here. Make sure that you have 3.5 all the way around. And really your 1 3/4 should be running right through the middle of the square, point to point. Same thing here, point to point. I'm going to cut off 2 sides. And remember, we were talking about 3 inches on the square squared. It's 3 inches finished. So it needs to be trimmed to 3.5 when we're talking measurements and not just picking a number there. So now I have my 3.5 line here and here. And again, if your square is stitched accurately, your 1/4 inch should be hitting here and here as well. So there it is. Here's the one that I did with the square squared ruler. They look pretty much the same when you're finished. So take your pick of which method you want to use. And you need to make 15 of these. It doesn't make any difference which blue goes with which pink. It's your choice. And remember, you will have 1 leftover pink square. It is not a mistake if you have 1 still there.